In the spring of 2021, the earth in rural Oklahoma simply split open without any warning, tearing a visible gash across the landscape wide enough to swallow a grown man whole, and deep enough that no one standing at the edge could see the bottom. No earthquake was recorded at that exact moment on any nearby instrument. No storm had passed through the night before. The ground just opened. Information from internet sources. Links in description. Subscribe. Let's begin. Oklahoma is not Iceland. It is not Japan or Chile or any of the volcanic island chains where the earth routinely reminds people of its restless and violent interior. Oklahoma is flat, landlocked, sitting in the middle of the North American continent on ancient bedrock that has been geologically stable for hundreds of millions of years. It is precisely the kind of place where you expect the ground beneath your feet to remain where it has always been, solid and indifferent and permanent. And yet, for the past 2 decades, something has been quietly going wrong beneath it. Imagine you are a farmer driving a tractor through a field you have worked for 30 years, a field where you know every rise and every hollow, every patch of clay and every stretch of good soil. And then one morning you see it from a distance, a line carved through the earth, as if something enormous and invisible reached up from below and pulled the surface apart from the inside. That is what witnesses in Oklahoma described in 2021, and nearly all of them say the same thing. The feeling was not curiosity, it was dread. The crack that appeared was not the kind of simple surface fracture that farmers and ranchers in dry climates recognize immediately. Those seasonal cracks are shallow, maybe a few inches deep at most, and they close again when the rains return, because they are caused by nothing more than soil moisture contracting in heat. This was something categorically different. People who walked up to the edge described walls with real depth, walls that descended into darkness below the point where any light from above could reach. The edges crumbled when touched because the surrounding land had been structurally destabilized over a wide area, not just at the surface. Accounts varied on the total length, but multiple witnesses and photographs circulating in the days after the event suggested a visible rupture running several hundred feet across open ground. Think about it. Several hundred feet is roughly the length of an entire city block, a trench opening in the middle of ground that is supposed to represent the stable interior of a continent. The first question anyone asks is the obvious one. Was it an earthquake? Oklahoma has not been a stranger to seismic activity in recent years, and the answer to that question is both more complicated and more disturbing than a simple yes or no. Between 2009 and 2015, Oklahoma experienced a surge in earthquakes so sudden and so dramatic that it drew serious attention from seismologists across the country and around the world. In 2015 alone, the state recorded more magnitude 3.0 or greater earthquakes than the state of California. To understand how extraordinary that is, you need to know that California sits directly on the Pacific Ring of Fire, one of the most tectonically violent zones on the surface of the planet, while Oklahoma is built on flat prairie and ancient red clay. You have to stop and absorb that comparison for a moment. A landlocked state in the American heartland, briefly outshaking one of the most seismically active regions on Earth, and most people outside the region barely noticed. The cause of that earthquake surge was eventually traced not to any natural geological process, but to something man-made: the deep underground injection of billions of gallons of high-pressure wastewater, a byproduct of oil and gas extraction operations that had been pumping that fluid into underground formations for decades. The pressure of that water, accumulating slowly in the pores and fractures of deep rock formations, was reactivating ancient fault lines that geologists had mapped and largely dismissed as completely dormant. Fault lines that had not moved since the age of dinosaurs were being woken up again, not by any shifting of tectonic plates, not by any volcanic activity, but by industrial infrastructure operating a mile or more below the surface of ordinary Oklahoma farmland. But return now to the spring of 2021 and the crack that opened. Local attention arrived quickly. Photographs spread on social media within hours. Regional news outlets ran brief segments, sometimes including shaky footage shot from smartphones at the edge of the rupture, showing the depth and the width and the unsettling way the surrounding soil had fractured in multiple directions. The story had the ingredients of something significant. And then, With a speed that struck many observers as strange, it disappeared. No official geological report was publicly released in the weeks or months that followed. No research paper from the Oklahoma Geological Survey, or any university, appeared in the scientific literature. No formal press conference addressed the event. No agency issued a public statement explaining what had caused the rupture or whether anything needed to be monitored going forward. That silence is the part of this story that researchers and local residents find impossible to set aside. Because in science, silence is not the same thing as nothing having happened. The Oklahoma Geological Survey is the state institution responsible for monitoring and documenting exactly this kind of event. It maintains a network of seismometers across the state, employs trained field geologists, and holds a formal public mandate to investigate and report on geological hazards affecting Oklahoma residents. When a visible ground rupture of this scale occurs, the reasonable expectation from both the scientific community and the general public is that an investigation follows, that findings are documented thoroughly, and that those documents enter the accessible public record. Imagine a crack 300 feet long appearing down the middle of a main street in any American city, and the city engineers and state agencies saying absolutely nothing about it publicly, publishing no findings, holding no briefings, and simply moving forward as if it had not happened. That analogy captures the confusion felt by many people who tried to follow this story past its initial coverage. To be precise about what the silence means and does not mean, the absence of a published paper does not automatically prove no investigation occurred. Government agencies routinely conduct internal assessments that never reach peer-reviewed journals or public press releases. Field teams visit sites, collect samples, write internal memos, and generate reports that are technically part of the public record, but practically invisible unless someone knows exactly which document to request and which office to contact. The bureaucratic machinery of official documentation can move with extraordinary slowness, particularly in a state where the political and economic relationships between regulatory agencies and the oil and gas extraction industry have historically been complicated in ways that outside observers have documented repeatedly. And that relationship is not incidental background. It is essential to understanding everything that happens geologically in Oklahoma right now. Oklahoma ranks consistently among the top oil and gas producing states in the country. The extraction industry employs tens of thousands of people across the state, generates billions of dollars in annual state revenue, and maintains deep political relationships with a state government that has historically positioned itself as supportive of the energy sector. When the earthquake surge of the previous decade was finally connected publicly to injection well activity, the response from industry and from official agencies was carefully managed and deliberately calibrated to avoid triggering either mass public alarm or the kind of aggressive federal regulatory response that would have fundamentally altered how injection wells were operated. Think about what is at stake economically every single time a geologist picks up a pen to write a report in that environment. A formal finding that definitively links a visible ground rupture to subsurface industrial activity does not stay in an academic journal. It opens legal liability for the companies operating nearby wells. It invites scrutiny from federal environmental regulators. It provides direct legal ammunition to landowners and environmental groups who have been contesting the injection well industry in Oklahoma courts for years. The financial pressure on what a scientist chooses to publish or not publish in that context is not subtle, and it is not imaginary. The ground crack of 2021 appeared in a part of the state that sits above one of the highest concentrations of active deep injection wells in the entire country. That geographic proximity is not by itself proof of any causal connection, and any honest scientist would be careful to say so. But it is also a fact that any honest geological investigation would have to address directly rather than quietly set aside. What makes the 2021 event harder to dismiss as an isolated anomaly is the broader pattern it fits into. For years before that crack appeared, satellite-based radar systems capable of measuring changes in land surface elevation to within a single centimeter had been detecting measurable ground deformation across significant portions of Oklahoma. Some areas were subsiding, others showed lateral displacement. The movement was slow, invisible to any person standing on the surface and looking around, but it was accumulating year after year in ways that were quietly changing the structural condition of the Earth above the fault networks and injection zones below. A crack that opens suddenly on the surface is rarely the product of a single, sudden event deep underground. It is almost always the final and visible expression of a process that has been building in the dark for a long time. Like the moment a bridge shows its first fracture, not because something new happened that day, but because years of stress finally exceeded the last margin of structural tolerance. And what geologists working this region began finding when they mapped the subsurface geology in detail after the earthquake surge is something that raises questions reaching well beyond the borders of Oklahoma. Because the fault structures documented beneath central and northern Oklahoma do not stop at the state line. They connect to systems that extend across a much wider region of the continent. Systems that were mapped only partially because for most of recorded geological history, no one had any urgent reason to map them carefully. They were dormant. They posed no recognized hazard. They were geological background noise in a part of the world where nothing of seismic consequence was supposed to happen. Until the wells went in, until the water went down, until, one spring morning in 2021, the Earth opened. The people who live above those fault systems are not seismologists. They are farmers and ranchers and small-town residents who measure the health of their land not by satellite radar readings or seismometer arrays, but by what they can see and touch and walk across every day. And what a growing number of them began reporting in the years surrounding the 2021 event was a landscape that felt subtly but unmistakably different than it had a decade before. Wells that had produced clean water for generations were showing changes in flow and pressure. Livestock were behaving strangely in certain pastures. Cellars and foundations on properties sitting above nothing more structurally complicated than flat Oklahoma clay were developing cracks that local contractors could not easily explain. These are not the kinds of observations that make it into peer-reviewed scientific literature. They are anecdotal. They are dismissed easily by anyone with a credential and a reason to dismiss them. But in the history of geology and environmental science, the pattern of ordinary people noticing something wrong with their land before official instruments confirm it is not rare. It is actually quite common. Imagine being one of those landowners. You have no laboratory. You have no seismometer. You have no access to the satellite deformation data that researchers in distant universities are quietly analyzing in publications that take years to reach print. What you have is the land you have lived on your entire life, and the land is telling you something that no official body will put in writing. The legal landscape surrounding these events is as tangled as the geology beneath it. Oklahoma landowners who have attempted to pursue legal action against injection well operators have faced a set of obstacles that attorneys working these cases describe as deliberately layered. First, there is the scientific causation problem. Proving in a courtroom that a specific well or cluster of wells caused a specific crack or a specific earthquake requires a level of documented scientific evidence that is difficult to assemble when the relevant agencies have not published findings. Second, there is the regulatory framework itself, which in Oklahoma was designed during decades when injection well activity was not understood to carry seismic risk, and which has been updated only incrementally, despite what the earthquake data of the past decade revealed. Third, there is the simple financial disparity between individual landowners and the legal departments of major extraction companies operating in the state. Think about the structure of that trap for a moment. The crack opens. The agency says nothing publicly. The scientific record stays empty. The landowner has no published study to cite in court. The case stalls or collapses, and the wells keep running. This dynamic did not emerge suddenly in 2021. It has been documented in academic work on what researchers in environmental law and science policy call the regulatory capture problem. The process by which the agencies tasked with overseeing an industry gradually come to serve that industry's interests more reliably than they serve the public interest they were created to protect. Oklahoma's relationship with its oil and gas sector is not unique in this respect, but it is one of the more extensively studied examples in the United States, precisely because the seismic consequences there became so dramatic and so visible so quickly. What makes the 2021 crack matter beyond Oklahoma is the question it forces into the open about much larger national and global infrastructure problem. Deep injection wells are not an Oklahoma phenomenon. There are hundreds of thousands of them operating across the United States alone, disposing of wastewater generated not only by oil and gas extraction, but by a wide range of industrial processes. The regulatory frameworks governing these wells vary significantly from state to state. The monitoring infrastructure is uneven. The scientific understanding of how injected fluid interacts with deep fault systems at scale is still being developed, still being debated, still generating findings that challenge assumptions that were treated as settled only few years ago. The 2021 event sits at the intersection of all of those unresolved questions, which may itself help explain the silence that followed it. A formal, published investigation that definitively characterized what happened, why it happened, and what it means for surrounding land and infrastructure would have implications reaching far beyond one crack in one Oklahoma field. It would become a reference point, it would be cited, it would travel. And something else sits beneath this story that is easy to overlook, but difficult to set aside once you notice it. The United States Geological Survey, the federal body with the broadest mandate and the deepest resources for exactly this kind of investigation, has published extensively on the induced seismicity problem in Oklahoma over the past decade. Their researchers produced some of the foundational work linking injection well activity to the earthquake surge. They maintain the national seismic hazard maps that every building code and infrastructure standard in the country depends on. In the months following the 2021 event, no public output from that agency addressed it directly. You have to sit with that for a moment. The most well-funded geological agency in the world, operating with a legal mandate to characterize seismic and geological hazards to the American public, produced nothing publicly accessible about visible ground rupture in a state that its own researchers had already identified as a zone of elevated human-caused geological risk. The silence from multiple independent institutions at multiple levels of government following the same event is a different kind of silence than any single agency failing to file a report on time. It has a shape. Researchers studying similar ground deformation events in other parts of the world have noted that visible surface ruptures of the kind described in the 2021 Oklahoma case almost always represent the surface expression of subsurface displacement along fault plane, meaning the crack you can see from above is a symptom, not the event itself. The event itself happened below, in the dark, at depth, where the walls of rock shifted past each other along a plane of weakness that had been accumulating stress for years. What comes next in cases like this is not always predictable, but it is also not completely unknown. The deformation that produced one visible crack rarely stops producing effects once the surface is broken. It continues, at a pace too slow for any individual to perceive day to day, reshaping the geometry of the rock below in ways that change where water moves, where pressure accumulates, and where the next point of failure will be. There are people living and farming above that ground right now. Their houses sit on foundations that rest on soil that rests on rock that is, by any honest assessment of the available evidence, in a different structural condition than it was 20 years ago. They are not being told this in any official or systematic way. The information that would allow them to make informed decisions about their land, their water, their buildings, and their futures exists in fragments, scattered across satellite data repositories and internal agency files and academic preprints, and personal observations of researchers who are careful about what they say publicly in a state where the consequences of saying the wrong thing professionally can be severe. That is not a conspiracy. Conspiracies require coordination and intention and secrecy actively maintained. What this is, more precisely, is a system producing silence as its natural output, the way a drainage basin produces a river, not because anyone decided the river should run that particular direction, but because that is simply where the slope leads, given the pressures at work. The crack in the ground in Oklahoma in 2021 is still there. It has not been officially explained. It has not been formally documented in the scientific literature. The land around it has continued to be farmed and lived on by people who mostly know what happened because they saw it or heard about it from neighbors, not because any institution responsible for their safety told them. And somewhere below the surface of that flat, quiet, landlocked prairie, in formations of ancient rock that have not seen daylight since before the first human being stood upright anywhere on Earth, the pressure is still changing. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.